Welcome back to Network Issues. This week, we're joined by Saad Alam. He's the CEO of Hone Health, and he stops by for a conversation that really talks about health, masculinity, algorithms, even a little bit into Looksmaxxing. And we've been talking a lot about how online spaces are shaping men's identities, what their insecurities are, and these ideas of self-improvement. But a lot of these conversations tend to involve things like testosterone, hormone health, and Looksmaxxing as a self-treatment. So we wanted to really bring in someone who understands the science. Saad joins us to help explain what testosterone is, why so many men are talking about it, and what's really going on with men's health, and how young men can engage with this topic without falling into misinformation, shortcuts, or algorithmic rabbit holes.
Hi, Saad. Welcome to our show. So glad you're here. Just want to say, first question out of the bat is, what is Hone Health? Tell us about some of your work and how you became interested in the topics of like men's health or the health of people as their like reproducibility.
Thanks so much for having me here. I really, really appreciate this. In terms of how did it get started, and I'll actually use that to talk about what the company does, because I think that it really feeds from a personal problem. I've been an athlete my entire life. I was an immigrant growing up in the country, and the best way I knew how to fit in was to go play sports. And so working out became a really big part of my life early on. Worked out 5 days a week for the past 6 days a week since I was probably like 15 or 16 years old. I'm 44 today. And so it's been a very large part of my life. I've taken incredible care of myself ever since I was a child. When I turned 35, there were a bunch of problems that started happening. Mental acuity and stamina started to slow down pretty dramatically. Started to gain weight, started to feel depressed, which are all completely counter to my personality. And so I went to my primary care physician and I said, "Doc, something is incredibly wrong with me." He said, "Men of Middle Eastern descent start to age a little bit soon. So I'm going to give you two things. I'm going to give you some Viagra and I'm going to give you an antidepressant because your mind's running a little bit too fast and I want you to go on your way." And I said, "That's bullshit. Zero chance that is a good answer." And so I started kicking around the healthcare system for probably about a year until I met a group of hormone optimization and regenerative physicians that told me that I had the testosterone levels of an 80-year-old man. So that was kind of like the first check mark. Went and got treated, completely changed my life. And then right around the same time, my father was unfortunately dying very slowly of a bunch of chronic diseases that were completely preventable. And then I'd also gone through watching my mother go through menopause at 36 that was medically induced and seeing the horror it had caused in our lives because of it. She didn't know what she was going through. My father didn't know how to support her. I started thinking about the next mission of my life. It was quite literally after I sold my last business, I want to help people live as long as they possibly can and have a tremendous amount of confidence when they do that. And so the easiest way to describe Hone is we are the largest longevity company by revenue right now in the country. We take people and we basically say, what's happening in your life? Let's figure out how to assess and diagnose that, put you on the phone with a physician for 30 to 45 minutes, and then provide you with a really complex protocol of treatments that can include lifestyle, diet, medications. And then every 90 days, let's continue to treat you and watch how your body's metabolizing it every single 90 days in perpetuity to basically give you exactly the kind of like health you're looking for. And so we're 5.5 years in, we're 250 doctors over 40 states.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty incredible. Yeah. First off, happy birthday, right? Today's your birthday?
Yeah, it is.
Thank you for joining us. That's your birthday. I'm 44 this year. I'm 44 right now. I turned 45 in 2 months. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that's 250. So do you have like, is Hone Health like all over the US? Is it global?
So we're in 40 states, most of the US. There's certain places that we're not. Vermont, Nebraska, but in all of the big, large metropolitan areas, we are present. Everything's virtual too. So all telehealth.
Oh, excellent. So before we get into like some of the subject matter stuff, I'm fascinated by this company. So one first question is, I once heard the statistic that in your 30s, that's like when your body's like at its peak health. Like the average summiter of Mount Everest is like 35. So it's like, is that true? Is that like, do men and women, like, is that like the peak, or is that like a point where, I also heard like recently that 44 is like a fall off for men? Like, are these like real things, or is this just like words that we hear?
When you say you're in the peak health of your life at 35, I'd probably argue probably 25. I think it is a true statement that when you hit your 40s, things start to slow down. There's also a very seminal point when they say like you hit 63 or 64, there's another really hard downhill movement as well too. The thing that is really interesting though right now, that is unfortunate, is that in your 30s, you naturally stop producing as much testosterone as you used to. So from your 30s to your 40s, you lose 15 to 20% of your ability to naturally produce testosterone. That is then exacerbated by the fact that right now, 40% of men over 35 suffer from hormonal imbalances and low testosterone. And that is primarily from what we believe are environmental factors.
That's what we're going to get into that too. Because the first question I think we really want to ask you is something that has to do with the subject we've been studying. A couple of weeks ago, we started talking about the manosphere from Louis Theroux's documentary. And then we started getting into the subject matter that has happened to dominate my semester, which is Looksmaxxing. I guess it's a kind of a blunt question. It's like, why are men so obsessed with testosterone in general? And why is it such a content factory online?
There's like a phenomenon. I'm trying to think like the best way to answer that.
Yeah, sure.
Go to an everyday gym. Right? When most guys go and work out and try putting a lot of muscle on, they think it's because they're going to attract a lot more women. It's the opposite. You get way more dudes. Way more dudes you're out in public and you're with your girl and your girl's like, why are you staring at that dude's calves? There is an obsession. There's a competitiveness about being the biggest. There's competitive about being the strongest, the fastest. Amongst men that I think is something that's so deeply ingrained in us that it's really difficult to kind of almost like program out. And so there's always this kind of feeling of like, hey, that guy's bigger, they're better looking. It's actually very similar in the workplace too. That guy's smarter, his brain operates faster, he can retain more information. How can I be more like him? And so I think there's this constant pull to figure out how you can replace something that you feel like there may be a slight bit of lack of in your life. And so I think like the testosterone thing in general, and we have a men's and a women's business, and the women's business actually overtook our men's business last month in terms of growth. The reason why our women customers are starting to perform better than our men is for one very simple reason. They read the instructions versus the men don't read the instructions. It's like literally one of the biggest insights of our business. And so women are so much more introspective and they think more deeply. Men are kind of like blunt hammer and nail objects. I'm being serious.
No, you're right.
And it's like with women, you say, here's your protocol. Well, that's great. I got 15 questions for you. And when I'm about to start, I have another 15 questions for you. With men, you're like, here's the medication. Well, let me tell you how to use it. No, don't worry. I'll figure it. I'll figure out. I'll figure it out. And so there is just like two like completely different attitudes towards health from women and men. And with men, they very often look for like the easiest denominator to explain something. And it's like, oh, bigger, smarter, stronger, testosterone. And so I think it's just become, we use the word testosterone like it's really a hormone, when the reality is like testosterone is really a destination for a lot of men of like what they want to be.
Oh, wild. So now, before we get into like some of the content stuff, I'm more of a technical question. With the lack of testosterone does not hold someone back from still working out or like still improving their health. When the guys online are constantly using this term, are they using it incorrectly? Like, do they, like, you are right about the bluntness. That's why Des and I always talk about the term maxing. It's a blunt suffix. It's meant for people who don't need to read. There's like an instruction manual to this.
That is a true statement. Although I will say this. If you look at the Looksmaxxing trends on Instagram and TikTok, because it's important and because it's so granular, the instructions as to what's happening, the habits are fundamentally changing in society and people are becoming far more articulate and instructive on how to combine things or sequence them and stack them in order to achieve something very specific. And I think that is a very real thing that is happening. And I'll draw some analogies to it. I was like deep into the bodybuilding community when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And in those communities, people are blatantly abusing steroids, right? And they don't just do one steroid, they do 8 steroids that are stacked on top of each other and very carefully sequenced in weeks or days in order to understand how to achieve the maximal effect. And so what you basically have seen is like this very concept of like early biohacking that has now permeated popular culture, kind of like punctuated by GLPs and peptides. And that is now just becoming kind of like an everyday lexicon of, I mean, I live in New York City. The number of dudes, and women too, that are actively having this conversation, it is astounding. I was with 2 women that are incredibly affluent in their 50s and 60s yesterday. And these women had already been on peptides for 10 years and were giving me such detailed instructions on what their protocols are and how they're sequencing on and off them. So it is like a very real trend in society overall right now.
So I'm so curious. I know Jamie and I take a view of it from, a very manosphere vibe, but something I hear about as a woman, but also you hear about in the manosphere is exactly what you're talking about, these stacks. So I'm curious, at what point do you see the stacks negatively impacting people's health and then needing the assistance from, testosterone? Like, where do you see that people are over abusing them?
I'm going to answer your question by telling you about what I do, actually. And then I'm going to tell you how healthy I am. And then I'll tell you about where I think it's good, where I think it's bad, and if it's right for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's assume I'm on the further end of kind of like obsession. And also too, because I run a business like this, like it's literally my passion is giving this thing I found back to other people because I think it's so wonderful. I'm on hormones. I'm on multiple peptides. I've got a sauna and a cold plunge and a hyperbaric oxygen chamber in my home office. I do therapeutic phlebotomy, everything from red light, anything that's interesting, I try it. Now I also, every 90 days, I probably look at 500 to 600 biomarkers, and I've got a group of 4 physicians that are constantly around me that look at all my health, and we're constantly thinking about how can I get better. For me, the most interesting thing is not how do I look more muscular, but it is how do I actually reduce my biological age, but how can I do all of those things at the highest cognitive level possible? It literally is like the number one KPI for my overall health. The most interesting thing that is happening over the past like 6 or 7 months of my life is I've been able to figure out how to increase the amount of deep sleep and reduce the overall amount of sleep I need so I can get up at 4:45 every morning and just do it even harder. And so you could argue like that's obsessive and that sounds sick. I do it in a very scientific way. I work with physicians. I don't buy peptides from RSO facilities online. I'm going to 503A compounders and I'm working with doctors that are saying this stuff works. I'm testing constantly. And also this didn't happen overnight. And so when you say what's bad, when a bodybuilder does like real stacks of steroids, when I'm doing testosterone through Hone, or I'm like replacing the testosterone that's leaving my body, I do 50 milligrams a week. It's a real number. When a bodybuilder is trying to put on weight to be yoked so he can get ready for competition, he does between 2,000 and 4,000 milligrams per week very often, right? So like the scale and the scope is so much larger. And to do that for a long period of time, and you don't just do a single cycle, you do a cycle, you come off for 3 months, you do a cycle, you come off for 3 months, and you stack them for years. And then you throw things in like growth hormone and insulin, and it causes all kinds of other problems. That is like the dangerous side of it, like the real dangerous side. I'm very lucky I get to hang out with a lot of younger people in the city. If we go to the gym, we hang out. They get their advice from TikTok, Reddit, and then go buy RSO peptides from God knows where, and they're injecting themselves. And a lot of the stuff they say is like basement bro science. The reality is like they're not talking about it from like a biological or physiological perspective. They're just spouting off what they heard somewhere else.
Right.
And so that's also dangerous too, because then you're misinforming about what's really healthy. I will say that I have been very fortunate to do it from a place of health and control. What people don't realize is actually just a little bit goes a really long way. And so sometimes people are impatient and they want to just push the balance out further.
You're like maxing out. You're doing something that's more intense, and it shows that intensity is like the answer. In an age where the environment itself is changing these numbers, right? Like testosterone is dropping. I want to first, that's the first half of this question is, what does that mean when you're saying environmental aspects? I hear about this all the time. I hear about microplastics and all this other stuff. I don't know the answer, so I'm asking you. And the second half is, what do you do with a client that comes in with what I want to call misinformation, like stuff like that?
All right, so let's talk about the first one. So the way your body works is you have something called your hypothalamus and your pituitary. And assume that your hypothalamus is like a temperature sensor for all the hormones in your body, and your pituitary releases hormones into your body to help make changes based upon what this feels. Your hypothalamus senses how much of those hormones there are in your body, and it modulates the amount of LH it is actually producing for the rest of your body. When you are in an environment full of environmental contaminants, specifically microplastics, they resemble estrogenic compounds, meaning they resemble a lot of estrogen. The way your body works is when you produce testosterone, it spills into DHT or estrogen. If there's too much estrogen in your body, all of a sudden your hypothalamus senses that and it says, oh wait, too much estrogen. That means there's too much testosterone probably being produced. Let me reduce that LH signal. And so when you look at the testosterone level of young men, it is significantly decreased. What is that number? Men 30 years ago had 26% more testosterone. Not in the US, globally. Now hold on, this number is an even bigger kicker. 30 years ago, 3 decades ago, men had 50% more sperm. I'm not being hyperbolic. These are very much research-driven, evidence-based facts. And when I first heard about it, I thought it was incredibly conspiratorial in nature. But then as you start really ingraining yourself in the science, you realize no, this is a real thing that's happening.
I'm sorry. It just seems like 30 years, it seems very rapid for that number to drop. So obviously the environment, things have changed. So now we're at a point where in those same 30 years, that identical time period from, let's say, the 1990s to the present, which is crazy that that's 30 years ago, we also have the rise of the influencer, of the health influencer, of bodybuilding.com, which was the first biggest site on the internet. And we talk a lot about how the reason it was successful, the internet has this base language of DIY, improvement, self-improvement. So it fit into that model. And then as we go forward to the more algorithmic feeds and content creation, now you have people who are constructing these realities. We have a whole movements of people who basically tell stories. They're storytellers about health, but they don't really have the knowledge you just said. That was new to me. And so now when you meet somebody who's basically given themselves the wrong information to themselves and are doing the buying the peptides off the wrong markets, how do you course correct?
There are 2 very specific approaches for treatment. That I'm probably simplifying. There's probably more than 2 approaches. But assume there's the optimization-based approach, which is even if you have no clinical reason to take this medication, we're going to give it to you. This is these are the Looksmaxxers right now in society. Then there's the clinical approach, which is, do you actually have a clinical reason to take this medication, i.e. do you have a healthcare problem? When we built Hone, the biggest problem was if you go build an optimization-based business, you can actually get yourself into a lot of regulatory trouble, a lot of it. We said, what are our clinical guidelines? And let's stick to it. And the biggest one that we did is we said, unless you have clinically low testosterone or what you call hypogonadal, we will not treat you, okay? So that's the first thing. So we have a patient tested. They come in, if they're below a certain threshold, we are willing to treat them. They have a conversation with a physician. Now, after the conversation, most places just send the medication. Let me just get it to you. We actually do a second test that patients hate. And it's because we want a confirmatory analysis that they truly are low. There's not a law. You don't have to do this. The American Urological Association likes you to. Most physicians won't do that because it's just more work. Then when we prescribe the medications, we check against a national government database to make sure you are not getting it from anywhere else and trying to abuse the system. Then every 90 days, you've got to do another physician consult and another blood analysis to figure out how your body's doing, so we can very carefully control it and make sure none of the side effects, which are very serious, are not accelerating in your body. And so when people come into us, they're very much, yo, let me get some tea so I can get swollen. You're like, no. That's not the business. That's not the business I'm in. Like,
something that you've touched on a few times is all of the misinformation that's out in this industry. I think that's where a lot of our younger generation is turning to things like Looksmaxxing because it seems like an easy solution. But what would you recommend to people that are looking to cut through all the fluff, and where do you go to learn real credible information about things like this? Because obviously, Jamie and I spend a lot of time online. We spend a lot of time in the space, and you just told us several things that we were unaware of.
On one hand, and it'll answer your question, Destiny, in it. On one hand, in order to truly practice longevity, or kind of like what I do with my life, you do have to divorce yourself a little bit from traditional medical canon, and you have to be willing to test on yourself. And what I mean by that is that the paradigm shift that is happening right now is that physicians right now are prescribing more and more medications off label. And if a patient is willing to kind of like test themselves alongside that physician, and you have to be willing to understand that if I give the red pill to you versus Jamie, might be the same red pill, your body may react to it completely differently than Jamie's does. And even though it's indicated for something completely different. And so it's really important that if you think something has medical credibility or it is clinically relevant to you, if you try it with a physician, you can try it, it may not work, and you got to pull it back off. And a large part of the world that we're going into will be able to design our health, and that will involve you trying and removing a lot of things until you find the right stack that's the best for you. And going back to your last question about like what's unsafe is taking 15 medications or 20 medications. What's really healthy is trying 15 or 20 medications over the course of time to find the 3 that really work the best for you. That's safe. That's the right thing to do, because also 3, that's sustainable. So now that's one hand of it, which is you have to be willing to test alongside physicians. The other side of it is you have to be willing to do things in a very controlled fashion and not do things in kind of like a haphazard, I'm scrolling my phone and I just learned something new, so I got to try that kind of fashion, which is, I think, a lot of what I see happening right now is, hey, I heard this person say this thing that's opposing to this thing, so I'm going to take that advice better. And look, we have and are living in one of the most amazing moments in life right now, where whether it's Claude or Chat, that's your best friend, you can have intelligent conversations. And it's also important too. Whatever it gives you back isn't always right. You have to learn how to question it. Like that's one of the most important skills is teaching yourself how to question it, because it will write it in a way that makes it feel like you were brilliant and you were smart and it is right every time. And so when you ask the question, like, where do you go for information? I think you have to be very careful not to constantly just flip your beliefs based upon what you hear on a social channel. And you've got to be careful and develop the right, it's almost like a bullshit-ometer of who's real versus who's not. And then Jamie, to your point, who's doing this to go viral versus who's actually a credible medical professional that is saying something that makes sense. Also, that isn't too politically biased, right? And then the other thing too is, I really do believe this. If this is important to you, and I think it should be, because there's nothing more important than your health, because it allows you to do so many other things in your life, you should figure out how to spend a couple extra bucks and go find the right professionals to work with. This is also important. They're all in a spectrum of their understanding of the way that this world is moving right now. And so you have to be very, very careful about also taking advice for them. And you have to almost date around physicians until you find the right one that you believe is credible. We do a lot of that. There are a bunch of other businesses that are emerging right now, not to tell you exactly what's right, but to help you walk through that journey if kind of like this culture is the one that you're running towards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there is no one individual place, because even if you say, hey, would I go to WebMD? I used to run marketing and sales for the largest WebMD competitor. And I'll tell you, like, that science is also outdated as well, too. They're running in a medical education system that's 10 years behind.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really figuring out and curating the most credible voices in the room and working with physicians that understand that the culture you're moving towards is one of testing.
This is what's wonderful about what you're saying is like, it's kind of the same work that has to go on when you're seeking a therapist. You know, you can't just pick, they're not all matches, you know, like, so your body is looking for that too. It is one of those things that like we combat with, we've talked about on previous episodes here, which is about patience. You know, sometimes you can't, to combat a lot of this, it requires like not just trial and error, but the willingness to know it takes a while. And like, I take your point really like firmly here, because it's like now I think a fair amount of my friends are having children older, you know, which means when my kids graduate high school, I'll be almost 60 at that point. You know, it's like, I don't want to look like my dad at 60. Like, I want to be like healthier than I am now, to be very honest with you. So it's like, that means work. I know I do have faults as it is. Like, I do have to like cut out like some of the vices that I have. And that takes work alone just to start that process before getting to the health process. But like, what I also find optimistic is not only like people being more curious about like health longevity, but I do find like new language is helpful. Like, I want to ask about how your company deals with the idea of like women's health too. Like words like perimenopause, I didn't even know like existed. And like, that's great for me to have conversation with my wife about her health and how she's aging through this. As we get older and co-raise children, health matters to everybody. And so how do you help men understand women's health, like as a co-relationship with this?
We're so focused on helping men understand their health, and they're so bad at understanding their health.
Facts.
By the way, that's also to be said. I mean, women are far more in tune with their body, but we're also coming out of a very dark 25-year period. The Women's Health Initiative came out with a study that basically said that women who are on hormone replacement therapy get breast cancer. And if you look at the real data, there's a slight increase, but when you look at the entire proportion of it, it was greatly misexaggerated. The media took it, they ran with it, and the total number of women on HRT went from 25% of the population to 4%. 3 months ago, the FDA took the black box warning off and said, hey, these studies were done in the wrong cross population of women. This is not a thing. I can't believe it, but we've had an entire generation of women that have gone through perimenopause and menopause without hormone replacement therapy. And if you very often don't take it before you're a specific age in your 60s, it's not as effective and you don't get the same cardiac benefits. And now that the HRT black box warning came off, it has been an explosion of interest. And I would even argue the explosion of interest happened 2.5 years ago when the New York Times first wrote the article debunking that study. And so I think what we see a lot of is women before, whenever you mentioned that they were in perimenopause or menopause, they were like, no. I don't even want to hear it. That is the worst thing in the world. And I think now women are being like, all right, that's probably what's happening. And these are the symptoms. By the way, I know it's completely treatable. Let's roll with it. Let's figure out how to fix it. And so I think those are a lot of the conversations that we're dealing with is women finally actually feeling far more empowered than men, if I'm being perfectly honest. Men, when they have a problem, they come to you quietly and they're like, listen, I got this problem. Like my wife and I, and you're like, listen, I get it. Versus women are very specific. I've been tracking my cycles, and instead of having them every 28 days, now I'm having them like every 56 days. On top of it too, 3 days a week, I'm having hot flashes. And I think it's perimenopause, or I think it's menopause. The single most important thing, if you describe a man versus a woman's experience on our site and what they go through, and we spend a lot of time with marketing exercises, is for women, it's validation. And for men, it's a solution, which, by the way, this is exactly how men and women think. Guys, solution, take it, go. Women, I've been trying to tell my doctor this for years, and they have dismissed me, and I feel so happy that you are validating what I'm going through. That's the best way to characterize the two experiences.
I'm nodding my head through all of this because although I didn't know the name of the specific study, there are a lot of women in my life that are older that cited that study and were too afraid to do anything about it and suffered greatly. And then there were the rare one or two that decided that it was worth the risk at the time. And the difference between them is absolutely staggering. And then it validates me. I'm 36, and now I get hit with all of the prepare for perimenopause stuff on social media. But you're right, it does give me a sense of calm because often when I go to a doctor, I am not believed. I've had to fight for my health for most of my life. I've had to fight through multiple specialists and tons of people. So you're right, women are searching for validation. I'm constantly searching for what will validate me, but is a real solution, not something that seems pseudoscience-y, which I do think maybe we've lost the ability to understand that discernment to a specific sense because we live in a world of social media where a lot of people do what Jamie and I do right now, which is have a conversation, and it's very well put together, very well edited, very well marketed. And it's very difficult to understand branding at the bottom of this. And ultimately, that's what I feel like these young people are going through online, right? They're trying to brand themselves, and they're looking for the quickest way possible to do that. So I think you've both validated that it's about the journey. It's about the trial and error. It's not about the quick solution.
So silly. Yeah. Yeah, it is silly. And now listen, I will say this too, and this is important, right? And Jamie, you hit the nail on the head. My wife and I talk about this all the time. I'm going to be 65 when my daughter's getting out of high school. Like that's just such a crazy. My wife was also, she'll turn 40 this year. She's an older mother. I actually don't think I would have had the confidence to make a decision to go into parenthood so late unless I had a firm belief on the way medical technology is moving right now. I think that the thing that is also, difficult to almost think about, and it's almost like going to sound science fiction-y, but it is a reality of the world we live in. Destinee, I'll take to you, right? 36 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You will probably live until you're 120 or 130. By the way, base case. And so when you start to think that you're going to have 90 years ahead of you, probably 80 really good years, it like fundamentally takes the arc of your life that you drew in your mind and it alters it. And it's really hard to go through the mental exercise to realize you may have thought you're going to retire at 65. Crazy. That world just doesn't exist. I mean, it does not exist. And when you are 85 or 90, that's when you're going to probably really start thinking about slowing down. And when you think about the elongation of total productive life that you will have, you then start thinking about what your career, the seasons of your life look like differently. And the people that have had kids a little bit later and are like deeply in this health world, they can see it and they actually forecast their lives in ways that are very untraditional, but will become the normal. And so I think we're living through a period where there are a lot of millennials that are just beginning to realize that that is a real thing. And I would even argue there are a lot of boomers that have been super healthy for their entire lives. And they're realizing that at 65, they have the ability to sprint faster than they could when they were in their 40s. And so I think it's a really exciting time that we're living through in our life. The Looksmaxxing part of it is it's the equivalent of what bodybuilders were doing to try to figure out the edges of where human performance lay. And all of what those kids are doing online and adults will eventually become what actually works in the future. They just happen to be showing it to us online and giving us access to what their journey looks like.
That's an ongoing thought of mine, which is because the internet is both cumulative and temporal. It's like the internet stays the same age, but the users get older. So as they go, they learn things that like are accumulating from previous people. So that means like what we're learning now in the 2020s becomes our beta tests. We're testing like what's going on in the future. So that leads me to my last question here, which is like, what advice would you give young people who are encountering content that they haven't yet even learned of Hone Health, or they haven't yet learned of like physicians or people that know how to even talk about testosterone, or maybe it's even taboo amongst their words. What advice would you give them to like enter this thought process of health and longevity, knowing that their lives are going to be much longer than like previous generation?
You're going to do things without a physician next to you because you may not necessarily be in a financial position or have access to them all the time. When you're in your early 20s, 22, 23, you're going to have a couple bucks in your pocket. You're watching what everyone's doing online, and you're realizing that some people are really getting ahead, and you're going to want to emulate where they are in life because you believe for some reason in your mind that if you look this way or if your waist is this skinny, that you're going to have this magical life. That's fine. That's what you're going to believe. You've got to figure out how to get there. The single most important thing is that when you make your choices, to be as informed as possible. So it is looking on your social channels, looking at the right versus left Looksmaxxer on those channels, going to credible health professionals, listening to them as well too, and then using your intelligence to figure out where the educated guess is that you're going to, or the educated bet is you're going to take. Don't just do things because you saw something at 11:55 the night before and you're going to wake up at 4:40 the next morning and go live a completely different life. That's not, be very thoughtful about the life that you're trying to construct. Put the pieces together, get on an Excel file. I know like that's silly, but like literally like go to Claude, go build a Google sheet, write it all out, think about the timeline. If you're doing that, at least you're putting thought into it rather than just, my friend told me to go get retatrutide from this illegal site in China. I ordered it. And then I ordered my bacteriostatic. I actually didn't have bacteriostatic water, so I just used bottled water and mixed them together. And now I'm injecting. Don't do that. And I see a lot of that. Don't do that. Just be smart. Be educated about what you're going to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Saad. This is really, I learned a lot. I halfway through this, I texted Destiny. I was like, this is mind blowing, So, and I guess that's what the best benefit of like you being the expert of this is. So I really appreciate your time today to share this with us, because it's in the terms of like oversaturation of media, this has been extremely helpful.
Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate it.
We learned a lot from that. I personally learned a lot. Some of that was actually completely mind blowing. There was things that Saad talked about, the way that we understand health in general and how many years go by without getting reality checks is important. Mm-hmm. But I also think one of the things that the point that he mentioned that really hit me the most was that the things we're experiencing in the 2020s become the history of the 2030s. And we forget that. And so sometimes when we have a perspective on Looksmaxxing, or like the idea of what people are doing with their health, we don't know what science that will become in the 2030s. And as something he mentioned that was really fascinating was that his health regimen is sort of a maxed regimen. He is maxed out, but he is not Looksmaxxing. Those are two different things. And I'm glad that we were able to talk about those.
What do you think is the biggest difference? Obviously, I think he comes from a very unique place. This is his job, is to focus on those very detailed aspects of health and wellness. So what do you think is the critical difference between what he's doing, which almost seems a little hustle culture, versus Looksmaxxing?
Well, for him, because his job is working in the health department, he gets to focus solely on being healthy. So what his job is maintenance or improvement, but maintenance improvement. Whereas Looksmaxxers, we have to remember, and this is super important, exist for content. So they are doing it because a screen exists. So they're doing it for the feed. Saad is doing it for health. And so those are two completely different things. They might look similar or sound similar, but they are completely different fields.
That's so fascinating. Well, I was really glad to finally have a guest on this episode. It is a perfect wrap up to what I feel like has been a 3-episode arc of Looksmaxxing on our end. So we will link to all the information for Hone Health and Saad if you'd like to learn more about what they are doing in their space. As always, thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you next week.